is here for you. Ooh. And now here's your host, Aaron Page.
All interviews presented on the Remedy Revolution podcast are designed to provide information and inspiration only. Guests of the podcast may present opinions and anecdotes which are solely their own. And as always, before beginning any treatment protocol, please consult with your preferred medical provider. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Remedy Revolution podcast. My name is Erin, and today's guest is somebody who I have admired for many, many, many years. And I'm slightly embarrassed to admit this. He may not remember, but we did meet in person back in 2021, and I was a blubbering mess because I was overwhelmed with emotion. And I don't even know why. It was just kind of one of those things where I was so grateful to be in his presence, to be able to speak to somebody who I had admired for such a long time. So please welcome to the show, Andy Wakefield. Thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be with you. Thank you.
Absolutely. So you are here to chat with us about Protocol 7. I had the pleasure of seeing this film at a private screening here in Austin, and I thought it was a fantastic film. Why did you decide to go from documentary filmmaking into this amazing realm of narrative filmmaking? What was that choice like for you?
Well, this story had come to me many years before, actually at an Autism One meeting when it was still in downtown Chicago. And at that time, when I was still practicing science, having ended my career as a physician in England, I was still conducting science in America. And so what I would do with these, people would come to me with extraordinary stories. They would come from federal agencies like the CDC, the FDA, or the Department of Health in the UK, or from the companies, the vaccine manufacturers. And they would say, we've done a terrible thing. Here is the evidence. And we can no longer live with this. And this was one such case. A very brave young man from Merck's MMR vaccine lab enlightened me about the fraud that was going on at Merck. And he'd been asked to participate in that fraud, and he'd refused. And not only had he refused, he'd attempted to stop it from within, which is very brave, put his job at risk, and then said, okay, if you continue to do this, I'm going to call in the FDA. And he did so. And so very brave fellow. And what I would do is to hand these stories off to lawyers who were well versed in the False Claims Act, for example, and they deal with them accordingly. But I realized that this would make not only a wonderful feature film into which I could integrate the story of a mother's journey with autism, but also it lent itself much better to a narrative feature film. And the great thing about narrative feature is you can take a degree of dramatic license. So we were not there in the room at Merck when these decisions were made. So one had to infer what might have taken place based upon what we'd been told. And I wrote the story in 2012, and I waited for it to play out in court, and I waited and I waited. And there were all kinds of stumbling blocks, motion to dismiss, motion for summary judgment, the way that companies usually do these things, and just to drag it out as long as possible. So we made the movie, and it was still in court. That's really unusual. Most films like this, for example, Erin Brockovich or The Insider, they're made long after the court case is settled or the congressional hearing has been held, and the book's been written, and then they make the movie. We were making it right in the heat of battle, which was challenging. If we got it wrong, we were going to get into big trouble. So I also, from a personal perspective, wanted to move on from documentary filmmaking. I wanted to make narrative feature films. I love working with actors. I love directing actors. And in the film before this, which was a sort of docudrama, I'd been working with actors and realized that, that's really where I wanted to go. So from now on, our company, I'm sure, will continue to invest or participate in documentaries, but from my own personal perspective, then we have many stories to tell, and in fact a slate of films that we want to make, which are narrative feature films.
I think that's so amazing because what better way to really introduce people who might be dragged kicking and screaming to a documentary, right? But who are much more open to watching a drama, especially when they might not know necessarily all of the information that's going to be presented. We can present, sensitive information that, of course, people like yourself have been speaking up about for a very long time in a way that allows people to come to the table and at least have that conversation to open a discussion. So I think it's brilliant. I think it's an amazing strategy. And I do hope that it really helps to open people's eyes to some of these conversations. I have to ask because I feel as though, for those of you who are unfamiliar, Dr. Wakefield was somebody who was really a pioneer. I think it was all the way back was it 1998 when you were working in the UK and exposed fraud that was going on. And you could have walked away from these conversations altogether. You could have gone off into obscurity, gone off and made feature films or whatever it was that you wanted to do. But something drove you to continue to have these conversations. So I have to ask, what drives you still?
Well, I started work on vaccines. As a gastroenterologist, I was involved in work on Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. I ran a big research team at the Royal Free Hospital in London. And those were my specific interests. And that led to looking at measles virus and measles vaccines in those conditions. And that was in 1990, 91. And then beyond that, in 1995, parents started coming to me and saying my child was fine until they had the MMR vaccine, the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, and then they regressed into autism. And they'd come to me because their children had intractable gastrointestinal symptoms. And so as is almost invariably the case in medicine, the parents were proven right. The medical profession that had said to these parents, it's just part of autism, forget about it, move on, put them in a home, have another child. I mean, it was appalling that was the attitude at the time. The parents were right. The children had intestinal inflammation, and that responded very well to therapy and dietary intervention. And the children got better, not just from the gastrointestinal perspective, but cognitively. As I'd been taught, this irreparable harm that had been done to these children, the permanent nature of their disorder was completely wrong. There was a reversible element to it, and medicine had ignored that and allowed many of these children to go to the wall as a consequence. And we, having observed that, parents being absolutely right in the medical profession, living in ignorance about this condition, when the mothers said my child regressed after a vaccine, we had to take that very seriously. And so among my colleagues I just said, I'm going to continue doing this work. They were very reluctant, not because it didn't merit attention, it didn't merit investigation, but because of the impact it might have on their reputation or their careers. And that really kind of made me angry, I'm afraid. Why did you sign up to do medicine in the first place? And the dean of the medical school took me aside and said, if you continue this vaccine safety research, it won't be good for your career. Well, I suppose he was right in many ways. But that kind of made me angry too. It made me redouble my efforts, because the alternative was going back to the clinic and sitting down with the mother with her autistic child and saying, I'm terribly sorry, I know what you're telling me is true, but there's the door. Would you mind taking your child and going and finding someone else, because it's not going to be good for my career? Well, that's not what I signed up to. It's not, I'm healthy and I can represent these children when they have no voice of their own. I can hopefully do something. And having seen their improvement in the face of really very simple dietary intervention and anti-inflammatory therapy that we would use for, say, Crohn's disease or colitis, then there was no turning back. And I came to a crossroads, which was, do I work for the government and the pharmaceutical companies, or do I work for these children? And that was a very simple choice to make. I mean, the consequences were profound, but the choice was a very simple one.
Absolutely. Well, the world is better for it. So we are grateful for the work that you do and continue to do now. So tell me a little bit. I know I want people, and I have encouraged people to continue to go out and see the film. They can see it now, I believe nationwide as well as in Canada. But I think ultimately, people are interested in what is this case all about. So I know there was fraud involved with the mumps portion of the MMR vaccine. Now, what is going on with the case now? I know it has been ongoing, and how can we, as ordinary citizens, follow what's going on, or perhaps even get involved with, exposing additional fraud?
There are three elements to the answer. The first is what can people do, and how should people get involved? The success of this film really depends upon how many people see it. I don't mean that from a financial perspective. I mean that from the impact that it needs to have on people's recognition of what is going on. Many people have woken up in the face of COVID. They really believe that the drug companies were there looking after their interests. The government was doing the same, and they realized that that's absolutely not the truth. And so many people have come to our side. When I began this, there were a handful of people worldwide prepared to discuss the thorny subject of vaccine safety. And now it's more than half the adult population of the world. So there's immense progress, but a lot of people have been harmed in the meantime. So please, you go to the movie. If you enjoy it, please take 10 of your friends. Each of them take 10 of their friends. The success is now down to the populace. We've got to get people globally to see this film, and then they'll understand what's really going on. So I've forgotten the second part of the question. That's the male brain for you, I'm afraid. Second part of the question was, what is going on? What about the fraud? What actually happened? Well,
correct.
Towards the end of the 90s, Merck realized that their mumps vaccine wasn't working. And this is not specifically a story about mumps. This is a story about how corporate entities deal with problems like a failure of their drug or their vaccine. So it can be extrapolated much more generally than just the mumps vaccine. But what happened is they realized it didn't work. It was out of compliance with what they'd said on the product information sheet and what they'd said on their license to get the vaccine originally. It wasn't protecting people at anything like the rate that they'd said it would. And what we were seeing is outbreaks of mumps in highly vaccinated populations, epidemics at Harvard, in Northwest Arkansas, on a US destroyer out at sea, then, really compromised American defense capability, this kind of thing. And this was a global phenomenon. And these people, the people who were suffering, had 2-3 doses of the MMR, the mumps vaccine, as part of that. So they had two options. They could either create a new, safer, better vaccine, or they could fix the data. And they chose to do that. And they did it through various devious means, none of which succeeded, so that they reached the point where they literally just had to cross out the numbers in the testing and change them for numbers that would give them what they wanted. And when the whistleblower, Steve Kralin, was asked to do that, he said no, he refused. And he then threatened to bring in the FDA. He was threatened with being imprisoned by Merck, by facing the courts. He didn't care. He went ahead and called in the FDA. The FDA did not, I have to say, act in the best interests of the American people. And they allowed this process to continue. Merck went on selling this vaccine. They went on profiting from it when it was out of compliance, when they should have stopped manufacturing the vaccine, stopped supplying it, stopped selling it for example, to the CDC or to doctors' offices. They should have withdrawn the vaccine, and they should have told people who had received this vaccine that it was not working as they had said it had. But none of that happened. So the American public doctors administering the vaccine continue to be deceived about the merits of this vaccination. Now, this is really important, and it's a safety issue. People say, well, isn't this about the efficacy of the vaccine? But it goes beyond that. Why? Because mumps is a trivial disease in children. CDC acknowledged that. It's a trivial disease in children, but not in young adults who've passed puberty. Why? Because it can cause testicular inflammation in boys, with infertility, ovarian inflammation in girls, brain inflammation. And so a vaccine that doesn't work, or doesn't work for a very long time, will mean that you have it as an infant. You then become susceptible again as a young adult. Now, when you have natural mumps, you're protected for life. They behave in very different ways. And so if you give a vaccine that doesn't work, then at some stage, there's going to be an epidemic amongst those in whom the vaccine immunity has waned. And that's exactly what has happened. And Merck knew that would happen, and they knew it was more dangerous when you got mumps later in life. So you have this inextricable link between safety and efficacy with the mumps vaccine. Children or young adults and older were deliberately put in harm's way in order to protect Merck's monopoly in the United States of the MMR vaccine. And so this is where it is in court at the moment. Now, the third part of your question was, where is the case? What's actually happening? And a particular judge, had been overseeing this case for many, many years, over a decade, and he had resisted Merck's motions to dismiss the case and wanted it to go to trial. And then, for some reason, the judge changed. They brought in a new judge, and the judge ruled in favor of Merck. He ruled in favor of Merck not because they hadn't committed fraud. They had. He ruled in favor of Merck essentially because the fraud he considered to be irrelevant, because the government went on purchasing the vaccine. So it therefore wasn't material that they'd committed fraud. Now, this is very similar to a case in Texas where with the Pfizer vaccine, it appears from a whistleblower story, they committed fraud in the testing of the COVID shot. They committed fraud, but the government bought the vaccine anyway, apparently knowing about the fraud. So you have this very, very dangerous liaison between the industry and government agencies that are there meant to be protecting the public, and they're not. They're protecting the companies. So the judge has ruled that it doesn't matter whether Merck commits fraud and children are put in harm's way and they develop mumps or infertility. None of that matters. It seems to matter only that the government, the CDC, in their Vaccines for Children program, went on purchasing the vaccine. And that decision was a disgrace. And that decision needs to be reversed. And in fact, it comes to trial in the appeals court in Philadelphia on July the 9th. And we will be there protesting outside of that court hearing. And we sincerely hope that the appellate court judges will make the right decision, overturn the lower court's decision, and the case will go to trial.
You know, it brings up a topic that we've discussed quite a bit about the revolving doors between pharmaceutical industry and those organizations, FDA, CDC, the three-letter agencies that are designed to protect people. However, when they are beholden to the pharmaceutical industry, both financially as well as professionally, right? Because they've already been colleagues previously. And then, you know, we have this insidious problem that doesn't seem to ever resolve itself because there's no checks and balances. It's just so unbelievable to me that we still continue to have these issues over and over and over again, and with very little fanfare. You know, not many people are discussing it. Media doesn't discuss it. Again, they're beholden to their advertisers, right? Brought to you by Pfizer. So,
It's an absolute
gosh.
This is why the film is so important. Okay, so you make a film and you're in the midst of litigation, and they've held this litigation in secret. Merck filed to have all the documents sealed The public couldn't see them, even though this was enormously in the public interest. And so these documents have now started to be unsealed. But we've already made the movie. Screenplay's been written, the film's been shot, the movie's been made, and it's coming out. And suddenly all these documents are appearing, and we're faced with the prospect of going through all of these documents, tens of thousands of pages of expert reports and depositions, this kind of thing, and then finding that our story was entirely wrong and we're going to be sued to the moon and back by Merck. Fortunately, though, for the film, we found that actually Merck got off rather lightly in the movie compared to real life. So what we're going to do is put all of those court documents online on our website at protocol7.movie, and people can read them for themselves. So we have cleared that hurdle, if you like, of the worry, the concern that we're going to be sued. Now, we may be sued just because Merck is big and strong and rich and we're not, but that's not a reason not to make the film and get it out there. One thing I've learned in the last 25, 30 years is never to make a decision based in fear. Never do it. You will regret it. And whether it's being vaccinated for fear of loss of your job or income, whatever it might be, never make a decision based in fear, particularly when that fear mongering is a deliberate policy on behalf of the government.
The mantra is always with vaccines, safe and effective. And even you pointed out about the case with mumps, further down the line, it can be a disease of increasing severity, just like things like the chickenpox vaccine. We introduced chickenpox vaccine. Now we have these crazy outbreaks of shingles, and particularly in elderly people, when it becomes far more difficult, symptoms are much more severe. And so when we're talking about safety and efficacy, right? Because that's obviously the mantra that people, it's the marketing ploy, right? What is the obsession, do you presume, with those two words, and why can we not get beyond that with regard to regulatory agencies and even just citizens who are pushing for the truth?
I think it's a powerful, it's a very simple mantra. It's also entirely false. When you look, for example, at safety issues, you can, and you'll know this very well, but for standard pharmaceuticals, drugs, not vaccine, then they all have to go through the most rigorous of testing. Long-term, randomized, placebo-controlled clinical trials. And even then, after 10 years of trial, when they're put into the marketplace, rare side effects occur that mean, in some cases, the drugs have to be withdrawn. But not so for vaccines. Vaccines are classified by the FDA as biologics. They're nowhere near as rigorously tested as regular drugs. They're not, and none of the vaccines on the childhood schedule, none, have been through long-term randomized placebo-controlled clinical trials. So comparing completely unvaccinated with vaccinated children to look at long-term health outcomes, those have not been done until recently, and they've not been done by the government. They've been done by individual researchers who've shown unambiguously that the vaccinated group do less well in the settings of allergic rhinitis, eczema, asthma, hay fever, autism, other developmental disorders, ADD, ADHD, and every study shows the same thing. So, but the contention that a vaccine is safe in the absence of those comparisons is a lie. That is purely false. Does not, and you would think, would you not, that when you're dealing with the lives of healthy infants, then the safety testing should be far more rigorous than standard pharmaceuticals that you might be giving, for example, to people with stage 4 cancer. There you might be prepared to take more of a chance on the basis that the patient otherwise was going to die, but not with children who are perfectly healthy. The standards of safety should be so much higher. So this is a regulatory issue, a government issue at its core that needs to be put right. And this, as you say, this insidious and dangerous relationship between the industry and the regulators has to be severed once and for all. They have to be completely separated, and there should be no revolving door. Well, I finished my job here, so I'll go and get a highly paid job there. That's got to stop.
How do we do that?
It has to come from the government. It has to be through legislation. It has to be from the top down. One of the, so people like Bobby Kennedy are fully aware of it. And Bobby Kennedy has studied this and written about it for a very long time. And it's someone like Bobby that we need in power to actually make this happen. The relationship between, as you pointed out, the manufacturers and their sponsorship of the nightly news networks. Their money comes essentially from the pharmaceutical industry. They couldn't maintain their programs without it. And so the drug companies get the editorial. They get to say what's put on the screen, what isn't. And they're never going to put on anything that's adverse to their own fortunes.
Mm-hmm. So you've done another film about the 1986 Act, which, for those of you listening who are unfamiliar, essentially eliminated liability protections for pharmaceutical industry when they were producing vaccines. And I know there's been some controversy, especially recently, about that particular act and whether or not it should be repealed or the intentions behind the original act. So maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that for us.
Certainly. In 1986, prior to 1986, we had the wholesale pertussis vaccine, which was causing a lot of brain damage in children. And so the drug companies who produced that vaccine were facing litigation, expensive litigation. And they knew they could make a safer vaccine, but they didn't want to go to the trouble of doing so. They also used it as leverage to say to the government, we're making this vaccine, we face liability, we can no longer continue in business if you don't indemnify us against litigation for death and injury. And so we're going to stop making the vaccine, and children will die from whooping cough, and it'll be your fault. How do you feel about that? So they essentially held the government's feet to the fire, and the government therefore introduced the Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, which took away liability from the drug companies for vaccines on the recommended childhood schedule, the CDC schedule. And that obviously didn't just mean the pertussis, the wholesale pertussis. It meant any vaccine that they produced. The other elements of that act were meant to be the fair compensation, the fair and adequate compensation of children who'd been injured in the sort of battle against infectious disease by their vaccines, and also to improve vaccine safety. Well, those latter two aspects have been a complete catastrophe. They haven't happened. But the taking away liability from the industry has worked extraordinarily well for them. And what it did is it gave the industry a perfect business model. They had a mandatory market. In other words, children, for the most part, had to get vaccinated to go to school, and they had no liability. All they could do was make a profit. And they made a massive profit. And they realized that they could introduce new vaccines onto the market for lesser diseases and make even more money. And that's exactly what they did. And so we now have 90-odd vaccines for children by the age of 18. It's 90-odd doses of, I think, 16 vaccines. It's probably gone up now since the COVID shot and the influenza. So there's been an alarming increase in the burden of the vaccine schedule without any testing of whether it's safe or not to give multiple vaccines to children on the same day. And there's just a study that's just come out from Brian Hooker that shows an exponential increase in severe adverse reactions to multiple vaccines on the same day. So when the science emerges many years later, it reveals that, yes, vaccines are extremely dangerous when given as they are at the moment. So what that did, let's come back to the companies. The companies now had a huge pot of money, and they used that. They used that to influence politicians and legislation. They used that to buy the media and determine the editorial. They used that to buy medical schools and define medical school training for doctors and for nurses. And they became inordinately powerful. And this allowed the government to put more and more pressure, coercive pressure on parents to fully vaccinate their children or face the consequences of having them taken out of school, having them taken away from their parents by Child Protective Services. And so it goes on. And so it's got to change. It's become absolutely outrageous. It should have been dealt with a long time ago. It hasn't been dealt with. We have exponential increases in severe developmental disorders, which are directly attributable to the vaccine, that the CDC themselves in the movie Vaxxed sought to destroy that evidence and cover it up and change the results. I mean, it's staggering what's happening, and we need powerful leadership from the very top to turn this around and make public health safe again. And the truth is, and I'll just finish on this, is that these people complain about you and me, and they complain about anti-vaxxers, and they insult Bobby Kennedy, but they only have themselves to blame. They have created this situation. Single-handedly, they have created this catastrophic loss of public trust in public health decision-making, and nowhere was this more evident than with COVID. So they only have themselves to blame.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think what really struck a lot of people about COVID is, number one, the government was not only funding the research on the trials and all of those things, then they funded the actual vaccines themselves, purchased them directly from, all of these pharmaceutical companies. And then there's of course no money left to take care of those who've been injured. And so as people come forward with, really horrific injuries, we've talked before about Maddie DeGarry, about Bree, all of these number of people and people that I treat in my own practice coming to me from React 19, who have no idea what they're going to do, and they've been completely blindsided. Their lives been turned upside down. And so the financial interest of the government themselves, I mean, is there ever a world in your mind where government has liability for some of this?
Yes, and the sad thing is that you say the government pay, but actually we pay, don't we?
Correct. Yeah.
We pay for this. Not the government just misappropriates our money and spends it, on this kind of thing, and that's a great sadness. I have to confess, I'm not a fan of big government. Big government. I've learned from autism that big government creates big problems and has no solutions for them.
Yeah.
Inherently corrupt and very dangerous. It makes the wrong decisions, and I think when you're beholden to experts, and what we've seen with COVID is really the death of experts, when you're beholden to the sort of dictatorial position of people like Tony Fauci, you're in real trouble. You're in real trouble. And that's the kind of thing that has to change, the scrutiny over who we put at the top and who makes the decisions and what conflicts they might have in the process of making those decisions. But I am an eternal optimist. I don't know why. I've been described as a pathological optimist. I do believe things can change, but they won't change without our full-on active participation as citizens, concerned citizens. And that's why, when I was in the clinic, I could help one child at a time. Making movies, I can bring the story to 10,000 people at one time and help to effect change. And so this is why it's so important that people watch this, form an opinion, have other people review it, and engage in that dialogue about what to do, because film is such a powerful medium. Americans understand film, and there's nothing quite like going to the movie theater in this instance with a whole bunch of like-minded people. You realize you're not alone. Something I learned with Vax, for parents of autistic children, they're often confined to the home. They can't get out there. It's 24/7. And then they go and see a movie and they realize that the auditorium is packed with people who have been through their experience. And suddenly there is a sense of camaraderie and power that we are not alone. We are a large group of people who can bring about change. So please, 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 I once again, everybody see this movie, get your friends, get your family, all those people you've argued with for years and refused to have Thanksgiving dinner with anymore because you had different opinions on, get them to the movie. And it's the beginning of an awakening, I do believe.
Yeah, these conversations that definitely need to happen, and I think are happening more and more as people start to realize that there is a real concern about corruption in the pharmaceutical industry in particular. So please, everybody, you can visit protocol7.movie to find out more about the film. Go out to your local theater. Please take as many friends as will go with you, even if you have to drag them kicking and screaming. The film itself is fantastic and really dives deep into what corruption looks like in the world of vaccines. All right, Andy, it is time for our 8 rapid fire questions. We ask these 8 questions of all of our guests. They are designed to give us a little bit more insight into who you are as a human being, a fellow human being. We love all of our human beings. So, are you ready?
I'm not sure. And what you're going to ask me.
Well, I've
Far
stumped
away. Let's
more
see
than
how it
one
is.
guest.
Okay. I should say, just to say, the movie has won, I think now 20, 25 or 26 movie awards. So it's a good movie as well as being very important for yours.
Fantastic. I love that. I love that. All right,
Far
number
away. Okay, here
all
I go.
right. First question. If you could choose only one natural remedy for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Love.
Hmm.
I know you want me to say something more specific. I could turn this computer around. I could show you the medication, the supplements that are here on my desk.
Yeah.
Do you
I
want
think
to?
I think love conquers all, right? So all right, number 2. Tell us something most people don't know about you.
Gosh, believe something. You want a rapid fire answer, and what don't most people? I love elephants.
Awesome. If I were to compile a playlist of happy music, what song would you suggest be added?
Well, I don't know, is it a happy song? But I suppose it is Bob Marley's Redemption song, I think.
Nice. What is your favorite guilty pleasure?
Oh, is this a family show or can we know? My favorite guilty pleasure is Cadbury's chocolate, I think.
Nice. All right. Next is what is the most influential book you've ever read?
100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
Beautiful. Amazing book. What does the word revolution mean to you?
For me, it applies to sort of a Chomsky-like view of the world. That it's the role of intellectuals in shaping change in people's thinking. I think that's the way I see it from my perspective, from my responsibility.
Sure. And what does the word remedy mean to you?
Putting right what's wrong in government.
And lastly, if you could impart one piece of wisdom onto our listeners, what would that be?
Trust, and this applies particularly to mothers. Please trust your intuition. It's kept us alive, been fashioned our evolution since the beginning of life on this planet. The mother's intuition, her understanding and her knowledge of her innate understanding of her child, and when they're well, when they're ill, what is their problem, and something I've witnessed and has really been a guiding light in my clinical practice. It's an extraordinarily powerful force. And it's the reason we're here now, not because of, as the film says, not because of men in white coats or vaccines or antibiotics, but that maternal intuition. So trust it. It served us well, and doctors have done their best to usurp it, but they will fail. So, and husbands need to trust in that maternal intuition.
I love that so much. I think many of us over the last few years knew that something was amiss. And it's actually what spurred things like this podcast. You know, people became more vocal, people started speaking truth.
to power, because ultimately we knew that those who were in power did not have our best interests at heart. So, Andy Wakefield, it has been such a pleasure. I encourage everybody out there listening, please go see the film Protocol 7. It's in theaters now. And please write a review as well. We would love to have as many reviews as possible. Bring as much attention to this film as you possibly can, because this is how we continue to get the message out there. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll see you next time. Take care.
With hope as a guiding light, through darkest days we'll fight the night. With a whole lot of passion, with a whole lot of truth, Remedy Revolution is here for you.